Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. In February, the Trump administration cut more than 90% of USAID's contract and aid to the world. It's a more than $60 billion cut to global programs, but the effect is being felt here at home. Joining us now is a founder and president of a North Carolina-based company that is one of those local American companies that is feeling the effects of these USAID cuts. She is Mary Faith Mount Kors. She's the president and founder of Ed Intersect. Mary Faith, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So as I framed in this conversation, you are based in North Carolina. You are the founder and president of something called Ed Intersect. And just for our audience, can you give the 60-second explainer of the work that your company does?
Certainly. Yes, we work in basic education. We do system strengthening work in partnership with governments in the countries in which we are working. So most of our work has been with USAID. So we see it as part of our service to the US government that we are working with our counterparts in, for example, our projects, our current ones were in Malawi and Tajikistan. And a lot of the work that Ed Intersect does as part of a larger implementation is research and evaluation in early reading and math. And we, as I said, develop these systems in partnership with the governments in the countries we are working with.
And you founded Ed Intersect 12 years ago. You've had successful projects through USAID, through UNICEF, again, based on focusing on education. Where do the Trump cuts leave you with your work in Malawi and Tajikistan right now?
So both of our current projects have been terminated. And at this time, that means that our work even for December and January that we had already completed with the US government has not been remunerated. We have not been paid for that work. We also do not have any portfolio going forward. So our current projects are gone, and we don't know in what ways we might be able to recover, but you can imagine any small business and maybe even a larger business. I mean, you don't have 6 months or 12 months of capital just sitting there. I mean, we need to be bringing in revenue in order to pay the folks that work on our technical team or work on our ops and finance. So we are looking at, potential, failure to continue. And it is hard. It's hard because it is a company that I founded and that I believe in our mission. And I believe that we made a very important contribution on these larger projects. And our focus has always been on excellence in our work, not necessarily growth or aggressive market share, but doing the work well. If U.S. foreign assistance is no more, then essentially, how do we move forward? I think we talked about, how we are in conversation on some small amounts of foundation funded work, but that is not the same as working on behalf of the U.S. government, building the trust and the relationships and the stability that goes into that as a small business.
There's, of course, the financial angle of the USAID partnerships. There's the logistical angle. But just to pick up on what you said about the foundations, I think, you are speaking to the Forbes audience who might think, there are a ton of philanthropists out there. There are a ton of foundations out there. Can the financial piece at least be compensated by the existing charitable structure within the U.S.? What would your response be to that question?
Well, I think, that conversation has obviously been going on for a number of years about how bilateral aid works in complementarity with foundations. I think one of the things is that there is a role, especially on them bringing particular expertise. It's never been about them bringing a large, maybe large dollar amounts of funding, but more about particular expertise that complements bilateral donors like USAID. And there's always been that impetus there to work with private sector partners as well. And so I think, larger foundations, maybe like Gates Foundation, can try to step into the breach more if they choose to. But they're still not the U.S. government. They're not going to be playing the same role in building trust and stability between the two countries, but also globally. I think also there are maybe high net worth individuals that, obviously if they want to step in more, then that could be something potentially transformational. But I have not, again, seen that yet. I'm trying to keep abreast of potential funding opportunities. And the flexibility maybe of foundations has grown even more, I think, over the past decade. But as far as replacing the U.S. government or filling the tremendous gap left by the retreat of the U.S. government, I don't know if, even in a forward-thinking structure, if that's possible.
Now, the structure of your education programs is such that you're working in early childhood education, often using the local language before English, French, or a more quote-unquote international or colonized language is used. Where does the suspension of this work leave the kids that you were working with? Were local teachers able to continue, or are they just left with free time and no support?
Well, the hope that I have, that we have, is that for example, the work we were doing with the government in Malawi, that everything we've done up to this point, that they're carrying that forward. And I would expect that to be the case. I don't know what it will mean for, access to school or quality moving forward, because those were some of the areas where one would hope the USAID partnership was making a big difference. There are also things that occur that affect the ability of children and teachers to get to school, such as, an epidemic or a natural disaster, which USAID was also there to help handle. So you think about the compounding issues of USAID departing, and departing so suddenly. All of those factors play into whether kids are able to get to school, whether they're able to go consistently, whether teachers are. So all of those factors surrounding school are going to be magnified, as well as what's happening in the classrooms. But I do hope that, like the assessment systems we've been building for the past 2 years, hand in hand with the government of Malawi, that those are up and running and, continuing. For example, though, I don't know, for example, tablets that were going to be used more and more. I don't know. I mean, this happened so suddenly that I know that, for example, in Tajikistan, math materials and math manipulatives that had been developed over the past year had to be put in a warehouse, stored. So they weren't even able to get to schools. So, I don't know exactly what's happening in these systems because it was a sudden departure. So I don't know.
Now, of course, a lot of this is under the name of cost cutting to the U.S. government. There are some political arguments that our focus should be on what happens in America and not beyond our borders. What is your response to these cuts and those arguments for those cuts? Is there any merit to that?
Well, I know that if anybody is looking at the debt and deficit, I'm sure you've seen the figures on this, that all of even just the federal jobs that are being cut, all of those combined would only result in 1 day of interest to our national debt. So they do not affect that. And so using those in an equation towards lowering debt or deficit is misinformation. It's not. It's just not the case. And if it's about efficiency, this has been very inefficient and continues to be very inefficient. And for the small business community, I mean, just speaking from my point of view and other colleagues that are small business owners, this is we're looking at dissolution. I mean, so what will we do? What will the people that were depending on our firm for further income, what will they do? What will this do to, I'm in North Carolina, what will this do to the consumer economy here? I already know of people who are putting their house on the market, people who are looking at, 2 incomes gone from their home, who work in international development. Universities are freezing on hiring. So where do people go to look for jobs, for example, in education? There's a big global health community here. There's a lot of agriculture that is connected to USAID here in North Carolina. What is going to happen to those farmers and those crops? So there's so many ripple effects. It's so multi-sectoral. And also, one of the things that I think is important is stability. We are destabilizing our economies here, but we're also destabilizing economies in all of these contexts in which we were working. So beyond just the trust that we had been building that has been eliminated, we are destabilizing, which will have effects, follow-on effects to our context and our economy as well. So I think the destabilizing factor of this is maybe we need to explain better, but it's just going to keep compounding over time. So I think that maybe if I've been trying to find the best ways to explain that to family and friends and connections and just to help people understand the immediate and the effects going forward.
Well, I think it might be easy for people to hear U.S. aid for international development, right? It sounds international, and people might not make the connection between a community in North Carolina or several communities in North Carolina and all of this international aid and maybe budget cuts that, depending on the news source that they're watching, they hear budget cuts and they think, great, that will help. But I just want to dig into the point that you just made about your local community. Can you talk a little bit more about the number of businesses and the number of people that you see that are affected by USAID or have businesses like yours where these cuts are really threatening the life of the business?
Sure. Here in North Carolina, we have 2 large organizations that do a lot of important USAID work, and that's RTI and FHI 360. Those have not been those are not our current partners. Our prime organization is in the DC area, Chemonics International, on the ones that I've already told you about that were terminated. But RTI, I know, like even I think it was yesterday, they had permanent terminations of 177 people in addition here in North Carolina, and 340 total employees some were in other states. That is almost, I think that's a huge number out of their international development group and international education specifically. And I think, they'll probably have further cuts once they close out the rest of their programs because they've been terminated. And then at an organization like RTI, they're also doing domestic education research, and with the closure or the intended closure of Department of Education, there are already awards being terminated there, research that's in, U.S. schools. So they're going to be terminating more people that are working domestically as well. And then at FHI 360, there's been tremendous layoffs as well. There are also other small businesses like mine. I was just talking to a colleague yesterday, a small business owner who has had to lay off people and is scrambling to find more work to try to bring some people back on. There are people who work in water and sanitation and other small business owners who, depending on how much diversification they have, they're laying off maybe direct USAID people who were funded on a USAID award that's been terminated, and keeping as many as they can that have other funding. In our case, as I said, our current awards were all with USAID. So we're starting over, to try to build essentially a new business the way it was 12 years ago when I started. For me, I've got to really look realistically at the timeline ahead, and at the job market. I think we're the fourth largest economic hit in terms of the USAID closure as far as, states in the United States. But it's pretty extensive. I mentioned agriculture, and there's also faith-based organizations here. I think one of them just maybe had some work that was restored. But there's people all over the state affected by this, and in universities. I mean, the University of North Carolina they've laid off. Last time I talked to them, it was like 35 people in the Carolina Population Center. So it's hundreds and thousands of people. As time moves on, the numbers get larger.
And you just alluded to it, but some of the organizations and academic institutions that could perhaps step in for USAID, a lot of them are not spending money they have. They're kind of pulling back and pulling in because no one knows about future budget cuts. So how are you looking at rebuilding your business? What are the steps you're taking, and do you have a deadline in your mind for when if you're going to call it?
As a small business owner, I do feel an obligation to due diligence on keeping a light on, as I say, through the end of this calendar year. And I have some hope that maybe as some new or afterworld to this starts to emerge, that potentially we could build some small pieces of work and maybe rebuild a portfolio. I have been talking with, for example, a couple of foundation funded small pieces of work to see if those could pan out, and how many people and types of people on our team we might need for a small piece of work. So I think it's not going to replace the type of work we were doing on a consistent manner on a 5-year award, for example, with USAID. I think it's going to be more piecemeal. So as to whether that will allow the small business to be sustainable, I don't know yet, but I want to give it the due diligence and the time. And I'm hopeful that maybe something, as things shift out and people start gaining footing, I think the footing is not solid right now. So I don't think that the whole industry and other potential funders have yet determined even their course of action. So, but in the meantime, as I think I mentioned, I have to, on a household level, find ways to try to replace the half of the household income that's been taken with this sudden closure. So I am trying to look at adjacent opportunities, but because the landscape of, for example, in the education sector has been decimated, I don't know if looking domestically will actually yield any real opportunities because of the retraction there as well. Even if a hire was expected, for example, at a university, it might not be able to happen because the cuts are starting to happen or are imminent there. So it's just a time of every day, what's happening today, and what might how might that shift the way I'm looking at this week. That's kind of like it's a day-to-day situation.
It's one day at a time. A lot of this conversation has been with the goal of educating the public because, as I framed at the top, I think people hear international aid, international development, and might not make the connection to how it affects people here in the States. But Mary Faith, I want to ask you, is there any other aspect of your experience or these cuts to USAID that you think the public doesn't understand or that the media is missing that you would raise to us right now?
I think, you know, for basic education, and in other sectors, there are similar laws in place. But for basic education, the READ Act is a law that was reauthorized in December, has always had strong bipartisan support, and is a national security imperative for the United States. Right now, with congressionally appropriated funds through existing laws like the READ Act being diverted or stopped, one of the questions that I have and that we have is, where is this congressionally appropriated money? And so we've been, talking with our representatives here in North Carolina to ask that question. But the Congress has the power of the purse. And so the question is, do they still have that? And how do we find out where that taxpayer money is that was appropriated for that specific national security imperative by Congress? So I think, that is one grand question about the way our government functions. We were doing this work for a reason, and without this work, the follow-on effects are going to continue to be dire. I mean, for our country, in addition to other countries, and restructuring and rethinking how we do this work, I am 100% behind. But when we're in a phase like this where everything has been turned off and companies and organizations will have to shut their doors, I don't know if we can even talk about a restructuring. I mean, restructuring while we are still viable would be really great. But so as it stands right now, I think as a U.S. taxpayer, I do want to understand not only why we're doing this, but where are our taxpayer dollars that were appropriated for this purpose.
Where is the money? That is a good question for perhaps Forbes reporters to dig into. Any other messages to the Forbes audience or to our reporting team? Any assignments you want to make?
Well, the other thing on a grander scale that we tend to try to remind people of is that, we have like a three-pronged way that the U.S. engages with the world. There's defense, diplomacy, and there's been development. And those three work in complementarity. And so our area is really about what we call soft power. And so what we're already seeing is that, China has taken over specifically projects that were USAID. I mean, we had a specific case of, one of our colleagues here in North Carolina, a Cambodia project that China literally just took the same text and put out, the exact same text in a press release about the China-Cambodia program on water. So the stepping in has already occurred. And again, that was part of the reason this was a national security imperative, not only our basic education work, but other sectors work. And so the soft power piece of this, like the seeding of that soft power space to other global powers like China and Russia, is also another area where I think we need some answers. And so keeping that conversation going with our elected officials about, if we were planning to face up to China's Belt and Road Initiative and now we're not, why aren't we? And why does that matter or not matter to you as someone representing us in Congress? So I think the soft power piece and how that safeguards the U.S. and our national security is an area that U.S. citizens can dig into and ask their elected officials about.
Mary Faith Mountcourse, President and founder of Ed Intersect, thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's been an uncertain and trying time for you and your business, and we really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.